Man, you need some Liberty stickers for the back of your truck. At LibertyStickers.com, they've got great state hate, like Pearl Harbor was an inside job. The Democrats want your guns. U.S. Army, die for Israel. Police brutality, not just for black people anymore. And government school, why you and your kids are so stupid. Check out these and 1,000 other great ones at LibertyStickers.com. And of course, they'll take care of all your custom printing for your band or your business at TheBumperSticker.com. That's LibertyStickers.com. Everyone else's stickers suck. All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. This is the Scott Horton Show. Find my full interview archives at scotthorton.org. And you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at /Scott Horton Show. Of course, we're live here on No Agenda, Monday through Friday, less Thursday, from 11 to 1 Texas time, 12 to 2 Eastern. And let me say real quick before we introduce our first guest, I saw they were talking about it in the chat room, and I'm not saying that you were saying otherwise, but I just want to make sure that the audience knows when it comes to this North Korea stuff, there's no such thing as a suitcase nuke. Certainly not as produced by the North Koreans. But the smallest nuke the Americans ever made was or the Russians for that matter, was a battlefield artillery nuke device that basically take up at least the trunk of a Lincoln Continental, something like that. It's a two-man job with many different heavy parts, et cetera, et cetera. So some guy just walking around carrying a nuclear bomb is Hollywood stuff. No such thing for real. And if you want to read about that, read Gordon Prather, Dr. Gordon Prather at antiwar.com, and he will dispel all of those silly fears for you. Okay, now, our first guest on the show today is the great Jason Leopold from Truthout.org. How are you doing, Jason? Welcome back to the show.
Hey, Scott. Great to be back with you. Thanks for having me on.
Good deal. Well, I'm very happy to have you here. And, man, this is some bad news, though. Deja vu, defense officials downplay growing Guantanamo hunger strike with Bush-era talking points. Ugh. First of all, the facts, and then we'll get to the politics.
Sure. Well, this hunger strike started apparently, in early February. And, the public, as you know, I'm not trying to criticize them, but there's a short attention span there in terms of, what's been happening over the years. There have been many hunger strikes at Guantanamo over the years. In fact, there are prisoners who've been, hunger striking for, I think, 6 or 7 years at this point. But, this one parallels one that took place in 2006. And if you recall, Scott, 'cause I know you've spoken about it before, that was one that preceded the 3 suspicious deaths that happened in June of 2006, and in which 3 detainees were, alleged to have committed suicide.
Okay, now we need to go ahead and mention here, for discrepancy's sake, that this was reported by the other Scott Horton, heroic anti-torture human rights lawyer and contributing editor at Harper's Magazine, the Guantanamo suicides. I just want to make sure nobody confused the issue that I was the one who did that work.
Yeah, and that started, by the way, that hunger strike started in May of 2006 when, according to the government's narrative, guards were doing, a walkthrough on, some of the cell blocks. They found a prisoner foaming at the mouth. They then found other prisoners unconscious, and it turns out that they, allegedly took, tried to overdose on medication that they had hoarded. And so what happened was Admiral Harry Harris, the one who famously said that the 3 suicides or alleged suicides was an act of asymmetrical warfare, he ordered a walkthrough.
Meaning what now? Wait. Hold on now. What does that even mean, asymmetrical warfare, people killing themselves? It's not like we're talking about they blew up a checkpoint somewhere and including themselves.
I think that's basically,
just to make us look bad? Is that what he's saying?
Yeah, exactly. That's it. That's exactly what he was trying to suggest.
They killed themselves just to make us look bad. Okay, just so I understand.
And he went further to say that they had no regard for other people's lives or their own lives. During or before that happened, 3 weeks before that happened, after these prisoners were found unconscious, he ordered a shakedown of all the cells. And he alleged that during that shakedown, guards found that prisoners were hiding drugs, medication, in their bindings of their Korans, among other places. For example, a prosthetic leg, one prisoner had a prosthetic leg, and they claimed that, he was hiding, medications there. So the handling of the Korans, the fact that it was touched and searched, led to a riot, and then led to, a hunger strike. That is sort of the context with my story, where I'm trying to draw the parallels between what happened back then and now. Because in February, there was another, or late January, early February, there was another sort of search that was taking place. And again, the prisoners' Korans were searched. This time they were searched by interpreters, translators. But the fact that they were touched at all is what the prisoners were protesting about. They weren't saying that they were desecrated. That is the sort of disinformation that I believe that Joint Task Force Guantanamo was putting out, because the prisoners are basically saying the fact that you guys are touching our Korans at all is what is what they were protesting about. And those searches, were the result of the death last September, which we spoke about, I believe, of Adnan Latif. So Adnan Latif was a Yemeni prisoner who was cleared for release, never should have been in Guantanamo, and he died last September, and the cause of death was suicide, and the government claims that he hoarded medications, and he took a lethal dose. He collected enough for a lethal dose and killed himself. And so, you have you have two new senior officials at Guantanamo, the commander of JTF, Gitmo, and the commander of the Joint Detention Group. And the commander of the Joint Detention Group has been the one that's been really, enforcing these standard operating procedures in terms of, we need to crack down, on these prisoners. And that started happening, shortly after Latif's death, because what was happening was an investigation was going on, and the United States Southern Command, Joint Task Force Guantanamo's higher command, started investigating the death of Adnan Latif, and that report is finished. It was finished in mid-November, and it concluded that he was, or rather, the standard operating procedures were not followed. I think there's a lot of questions that remain, but so they stepped up searches. They started to really crack down and start, and they started seizing personal belongings, letters, eyeglasses, isomats, which is sort of like a foam mattress pad, and then that led to the search of the Korans and the hunger strike. It's now taken on. That's the long sort of background, but it's now taken on. The prisoners at this point they're now sort of hunger striking, not just over that, but over their indefinite detention in general. So that's sort of the message at this point is like, look, we've been in here for 12 years. You haven't charged us. We're not on trial. Half are cleared for release. At this point, they're saying, you know what? We're ready to die. We're willing to die, over the fact that you continue to hold us indefinitely. So that's, what's happening at this point, and it's getting bad. I can tell you that that the government is still sort of claiming that, this is not a big deal. They're all, all the prisoners are liars. They make up stories. They're trying to get media attention. And when they, I seized on the media attention because it was very, very familiar to me, that statement. And that's when I looked back and saw that it's the exact same, nearly word for word, Scott, same message that was being put out back in 2006 during that last hunger strike, that last big one. And, much to my surprise, was actually put out by the same person, who was the spokesman over at, Joint Task Force Guantanamo. And, of course, he's, his job is to, speak to the media. So, but that's the message that's being put out there. And, and it begs the question as to why are they saying that? And I think that it's, it's important for the public to realize that, look, the prisoners are alleging that this is, that there's nothing different at this point. Nothing has changed from 7 years ago. And the attorneys are trying to make that point as well. And then you go to look at, when you look at the public or the official government response, you can see it's exactly the same.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's the thing, too. If you're held at Guantanamo, that already really sucks. But then you have a new president that comes in saying, I'm going to close Guantanamo and make sure everybody gets a fair review process to see this and that. If not a fair trial, some kind of hope for redress. And then, oh, yeah, you know what? The Republicans said that they would call me names if I did that, so never mind. Right. And then that's it. And so now you can go ahead and rot. Oh, and by the way, if you ever do get a military commission and they acquit you, I'm still going to hold you all for the rest of your lives anyway. And so how do you like that, too?
You completely captured it. That's exactly what, what the response has been. And, that's why... You
can see how that's pretty soul-crushing. That's worse than just being indefinitely detained, right? Indefinitely detained and jerked around all the time.
I would have to think that it is. I mean, I was looking, as I was putting this story together, Scott, I was looking back on, historically, hunger strikes in general. What do they mean? Why do prisoners hunger strike? Why do they hunger strike up in Pelican Bay here in California, at the prison there? And it's, it's sometimes a, political message. I think that I'm sure your listeners probably remember or I'm sure they remember, Bobby Sands and the IRA. I believe he, starved to death, over the fact that, the conditions of his confinement. And, they're doing the same thing here. And all these prisoners have, is this is their only form and most effective means of protest is hunger striking to get their message out. And, I should also note that they are aware of what the government response is and certainly, how it's being portrayed. The reason that the prisoners at Guantanamo are aware is because they actually get the news. They do see that the government is putting out these talking points that are identical to what happened in 2006, but they also see that this has received widespread coverage. Guantanamo has not been in the news for a very long time on this scale. So they see that, and that's actually sort of empowering them, if you will, because they realize that, wow, we can, obviously get a message out there. So they're committed at this point to continue it. And it really appears to be getting, worse and worse as the days and weeks go by. There's absolutely no, it does not appear to be any end in sight. The prisoners have said, look, allow us to surrender our Korans and, we'll start eating again. But that demand has been shot down because, the Joint Task Force Guantanamo officials say it would appear that, or it could be interpreted that we're denying the prisoners their, religious materials, which they have the right to. So there's a standoff, at this point. But, beyond that, I don't even think that would ultimately end it. At this point, they're saying, you know what? Charge us, or we're just going to starve to death. And from what I understand, have not been able to confirm it because Joint Task Force Guantanamo won't provide the details, that, at least one prisoner has already attempted suicide. So it's, like I said, in 2006, what happened is 3 prisoners, 3 weeks after the start of a hunger strike, were found dead. One guard named Staff Sergeant Joseph Hickman, he's the one who came forward providing evidence suggesting foul play. And, there's that sort of possibility, when I say possibility, that I'm referring to the fact that, deaths could happen here. So this is serious. This is a really, really big deal.
Mm-hmm. And now, I've been reading that the lawyers have been contradicting the government when it comes to, and a few times back and forth about just how many prisoners are actually participating in this hunger strike at this point, and the different camps involved, et cetera, like that. Can you fill in those details for us?
Sure. So, the government at first came out, I want to say late February, when reporters started getting word of, hey, there's a hunger strike happening, and it involved 15 prisoners or at that point. The response by the government, the response given to me was, "Oh, this is ridiculous. There's no widespread hunger strike. This is not, a prison-wide hunger strike. There's a few hunger strikers, and they hunger strike, they go on a hunger strike for various reasons." And literally, this is what was said, such as refusing, a certain brand of breakfast cereal. So really dismissing it, and the lawyers kept saying, "Listen, we're hearing from our clients that it's it's a prison-wide hunger strike at Camp 6, which is the communal camp where, the prisoners can sort of interact with each other. Camp 5 is more of the maximum security camp where, many are held in isolation. And so, the numbers started to dramatically increase from the government side. First it was 4, then 6, then 11, then 15, then 22, then, now it's up to 39, so that kept increasing. But the lawyers kept saying, no, everyone but two prisoners are on a hunger strike. Now, Camp 7, just to point out, is the camp that holds high value prisoners, the ones that were in custody of the CIA. So nobody knows what's happening over there.
The ones who might actually have been friends with bin Laden and Zawahiri at some point, as opposed to everybody else who was just some guy who got nabbed.
Exactly. And, in terms of, at this point, what's being said is there's, the government, or rather, the government is continuing to say it's not, camp-wide, or it's not prison-wide. It's, now it's up to 39, but as I indicated, their story has changed as the weeks go by. And, the prisoners are saying to their attorneys that it is, everyone is on a hunger strike, but two. On Friday, Shakir Amr, who I know you've spoken about before, he is the last British prisoner at Guantanamo who has been cleared for release for 5 years now, but continues to languish at Guantanamo. He told his attorney, and his attorney, Clive Stafford Smith, in a sworn declaration, said that they're playing games with the weights and the way that they define who is officially on a hunger strike. For example, they, allegedly weigh the prisoners while they're wearing shackles, so that adds a number of pounds, if you will. They, are basically saying that if you take, they're not counting certain prisoners on a hunger strike if they take a spoonful of honey to keep their sugar levels up. So the discrepancy is still sort of unresolved. And part of that problem, as I note in the story, is that, look, the government is telling reporters, the government spokespeople is telling reporters, these folks are not telling the truth. The prisoners are fabricating. But we as reporters don't have any access, to what's happening at Guantanamo. I mean, there are sanitized tours that, that we can take to visit, how things are sort of, or what's happening.
And in fact, you've just been there in Guantanamo in the past, couple of months?
I was there at the end of January. I'm going back in 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. Now, I was there for the military commissions. So, to cover the pretrial hearings for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the other, alleged co-conspirators of the 9/11 attack. And I did not have access to, the detention facilities. They would not allow us, under new rules that they implemented. If you're there for the military commissions, that's what you're there for. So we did not get to see the detention facilities. That's an entirely separate tour, that one would have to take. But but the key word is tour. It's sort of like, if you're going on a tour of the White House, you're being shown what they want to show you.
Like Walter Duranty in the Ukraine in the 1930s.
And there you go. Perfect. It's what they want to present to you. So the transparency issue is a problem. And, as I note on my, in this report, even if the government is telling the truth, or if there's any truth to what they're saying, it's hard for us to actually independently verify it because the entire operation is shrouded in secrecy, despite the fact that one of the taglines on the Joint Task Force Guantanamo website is, quote, transparent. Safe, legal, humane, transparent. Those are the 4 words that's emblazoned at the top of that website. So, there's no transparency. And that means that the closest that we come to actually hearing a prisoner's voice are these unclassified notes that attorneys have been providing us during either their telephone conversations or their in-person meetings, with the prisoners when they're there. That's the closest we come. And I will tell you that having looked at a wide range of these notes over the past week, they're all really consistent. They're very consistent in terms of the stories. So in addition to that, in terms of what they're, describing taking place there, in addition to that, the prisoners are also saying, look, we have acted out in our ways of protesting, and they've admitted that they've actually splashed guards and even, a delegate from the International Committee of the Red Cross with what's known as a cocktail, a mixture of, feces and urine. They've admitted that. But in addition to admitting that, they've also, talked about what's been happening, at least over the past 3 months, that sort of gave rise to this hunger strike, and it's very consistent. And because, to me, that they have admitted that quote-unquote bad behavior, it just makes the story, or it just makes what they're saying a bit more credible. So it's the closest,
Sure. And you can see why they would do such a thing, right? Because the Red Cross person, if not the guards, they'll be sure to mention that where other people can hear it. It's the kind of thing that gets a headline. And
right.
So if you start out an article going, oh, those damn monkeys throwing their feces, but then you read the thing and then you think, well, geez, I might throw mine too in the same situation.
Right. Look, there's no way that I can put myself in the shoes of, some of these men that are there. I mean, I've spoken to some of their families, okay? And what's come across to me is that they have families. They were just simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. They have, wives and sons and daughters and like I said, Adnan Latif, perfect example. He was a frequent hunger striker. This is a person who should not have been at Guantanamo. He was cleared for release. Shakir Amr, he speaks perfect English. He has been there for 12 years. Cleared for release. Why is he not, he's on a hunger strike now. He lost, about 32 pounds, he says. Why is he there? So
Is it because he's Yemeni, or you don't know?
I think that, or at least, let me say what his
is he Yemeni?
Attorneys, no. But his attorneys allege that he is being kept there, one, because they want to repatriate him to a place like Saudi Arabia. Okay, he wants to go home, to the UK, and they want him to keep his mouth shut. When you're released from Guantanamo, you don't get to suddenly, walk up to a newspaper reporter or a television reporter and start telling your story. You have to sign various documents that basically you agree that there was no your treatment. You were treated humanely. This is a guy who would be willing. Shakar Amr is a person who would absolutely want to talk, and it's clear that they don't want him to talk. So now, Scott, in order to, again, I'm telling you what's coming from the attorneys via their clients. So I have no firsthand knowledge myself because I've not been able to see anything. But what they're saying now is that, with the arrival of this new joint detention group commander, that there has been, quote, a return to the rules of 2006. And 2006 was a pretty brutal time. That's when, quite a bit of abuse took place. And now they're saying that in order to break this hunger strike, what they're alleging is happening is that there's been forced cell extractions by the emergency reaction force, that brutal guard force that has been written about in the past. Prisoners have been subjected to sleep deprivation, psychological abuse, such as, loud noises at night. Temperature, the temperature in the cell has been turned down to about 60 degrees. It's very cold. Allegedly denied potable water. And, so they're trying to allegedly break them to get them to, eat again. And it's starting to, it really is, for those of us who have been covering and paying close attention to Guantanamo, it does appear that we're really, really going backwards to a time when the worst abuses took place. And, again, when we try to follow up on it, it's, oh, no, they're liars. This is not happening. Well, something is happening. Their stories are all consistent. Some who are held in isolation obviously can't speak with others, yet they all have the same story. So this is a public relations disaster for the government.
Yeah. Well, and there are a lot of ways to torture and brutalize prisoners besides just outright hanging them upside down or keeping them awake for 2 weeks or, the kind of things that the Bush guys did at Guantanamo. I mean, it was much more crude and brutal tortures probably in Iraq and in Afghanistan. At Guantanamo Bay, it was more like CIA no-touch torture, stress positions, chaining you squatting to the floor for a week and that kind of crap. But there's a lot of ways to abuse and humiliate people short of, a John Yoo memo.
Of course there is. And, it's interesting that you brought up Iraq and Afghanistan. So, again, in these notes, these unclassified notes that the, attorneys have provided, the prisoners are saying that, certainly when it comes to, like, for example, the search of Qurans, the guards are saying, we search Qurans all the time in Iraq and Afghanistan. And by the way, this is a new rotation, a new guard force that's in place. So, and I believe they were, in Iraq, previously, but, I can't be sure of that, but, so there is a lot of that chatter going on that, hey, this is the way we did it in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so they're apparently applying that to what's happening now. And, it should be noted as well that, I mentioned standard operating procedures. Look, there are standard operating procedures that do need to be enforced. If there is truth to the fact that, prisoners are hoarding medication, well, that's obviously an SOP failure. Somebody is not, following the SOP, the standard operating procedure. So there's no question that it has to be, enforced. But with that said, they have been indefinitely detained for most of them for 12 years now. And, as such, the government or the, the military has tried to make them feel comfortable. How do they make them feel comfortable? Well, look, they've got satellite television. They've got Nintendo Game Boys. They've got all this great food to choose from, all this reading material. They can have various, items in their cells. So, trying to make them comfortable and as a result, they become accustomed to being treated a certain way. So then you have, a new joint detention group commander and also a new commander of the prison that comes in. They arrived last June, as well as the rotation of a new guard force. And suddenly everything, changes. And so they're like, hey, why are you taking this picture? Why are you taking my eyeglasses or this letter? What's happening? So their routines are being, interrupted. What they've become accustomed to is a point of the protest. So, I think that's sort of an important context for people to really understand. Again, none of the men, that have been charged. There's only been a few, that have been charged and that are currently on trial before, military commissions. So, they're used to living a certain way. And you've got these new people coming in and saying, hey, we're about to change everything. So it's, and obviously, issues revolving around the Quran are extremely sensitive. Certainly a sensitive issue.
As I'm listening to you talk about this stuff, Jason, I'm actually just thankful that ABC, CBS, and CNN and whoever don't understand any of this at all. Because if they did, they would be glomming on to just little things like, oh, poor baby took his picture away, or checked his Quran for suicide pills,
right,
or whatever, instead of the real point, which is, big protests over little issues in the dungeon they're being held in for the rest of their lives, which is the real context and the real point of the entire protest. Nobody's willing to starve themselves to death or willing to put themselves in a situation where now these thugs are going to be sticking a rubber hose up their nose and down into their stomach in order to pump them full of Ensure to keep them from dying over they took my magazine or they wouldn't let me watch Family Feud or something like that. Those are the kinds of things that can set it off, just like, riots in Afghanistan over Quran desecration set it off. But, of course, the real context is combat troops running around everywhere or prison without trial forever, et cetera.
I mean, that is ultimately the larger, issue there. But, look, I mean, to us, the issues over, like, a magazine or a Quran or the type of food, we shrug our shoulders at that. What they're protesting over that? I mean, how could we possibly understand that? Right?
Well, relative to being held without trial forever, anyway.
Right. So so with the fact that they are willing to die, over some of these issues, you really need to understand that this is all they have. These men are probably going to die at Guantanamo because, let's face it, Scott, there is absolutely nothing that is being done to either repatriate, these prisoners, to shutter, the part of Guantanamo that in which they're held. There's nothing being done. So they also see how the public has sort of said goodbye to Guantanamo. The fact that it's not in the news. And, to me, it was quite stunning to see even, every day there's a new story coming out. This is getting widespread coverage. It's reigniting the debate and the conversation, about Guantanamo and the way that we treat, or the way that we have been treating, these prisoners. So, with regard to CNN and ABC and CBS, I don't think that they would be able, to understand that. And that's why I started to get real interested as I was, doing the research on, hunger strikes in general. And what was fascinating to me is that back in the 90s at Guantanamo, when we held the Haitian immigrants there, and that was at a time when we also were basically saying that, the laws, the U.S. laws did not apply and we could hold them indefinitely. They went on a hunger strike. as a result. So that, this history over, conditions of confinement, treatment, it really does show that this is the only real power that that any of these folks have. And you can see how, the response to it, or the lack of response, is just, it's a nightmare. Because how do they deal with it?
Well, and that leads me to my last question, and it's a stupid one. Is there a single politician in Washington, D.C. who you think could be prodded into making a peep about this, or holding a committee hearing, or doing the slightest thing to move the ball forward on closing this damn prison down?
No, absolutely not one single person that I think. I think that there are some staffers on some of these committees who, have been working really hard to try and get the, lawmakers to, take it up again. And, obviously this is something that the House and Senate Armed Services Committee would look at. If you recall, back in 2009, I think it was 2009, Carl Levin, the chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, he released that stunning, explosive report about the treatment of prisoners at Guantanamo and elsewhere. It was damning. But you know what? There has not been any oversight hearings held on Guantanamo, and not one lawmaker, Scott, has made a peep about what has been taking place there, other than to say that, we need to keep it open. But right. Listen, this is where the partisan politics come into play. If this was George Bush and this was taking place, heck, if this was Mitt Romney or Sarah Palin or anyone else other than, Barack Obama, you can be sure that Carl Levin, John Conyers and would be firing off press releases. They're not saying a word. Yeah, there'd be a lot of screaming and pounding of fists at all the liberal blogs and through the rest of the rank and file, too. But they've all got something better to pay attention to somehow during this. Yeah, there would be pounding of fists by, the same folks that were pounding their fists at this, when it was happening under George Bush. Those folks have also been silent. And I'm talking about the public and as you mentioned, the liberal bloggers. This isn't a partisan issue. I mean, this is a human rights issue. It's a moral issue. This isn't something where, you throw this into which side are you on? I mean, look, you and I have talked about this. We put out, our State Department regularly admonishes other governments for the treatment of prisoners in this fashion. Right. So it's, it comes back to how little credibility we have. Yeah. The U.S. government. That's right. Yeah. All right, man. Thanks for your great work. It's great. I appreciate your time on the show, as always. Thanks. I appreciate you giving it attention. All right, everybody. That is our good friend Jason Leopold from Truthout.org. He is investigative reporter there. This latest piece is defense officials downplay growing Guantanamo hunger strike with Bush-era talking points. And please check out his book, News Junkie, and the latest, From Hopeful Immigrant to FBI Informant, the inside story of the other Abu Zubaydah, is now available as an e-book. You can find the link there at truthout.org and follow him at Twitter at Jason Leopold. Hey y'all, Scott here. Like I told you before, the Future Freedom Foundation at FFF.org represents the best of the libertarian movement. Led by the fearless Jacob Hornberger, FFF writers James Bovard, Sheldon Richman, Wendy McElroy, Anthony Gregory, and many more write the op-eds and the books, host the events, and give the speeches that are changing our world for the better. Help support the Future Freedom Foundation. Subscribe to their magazine, The Future of Freedom. Or to contribute, just look for the big red donate button at the top of FFF.org. Peace and freedom. Thank you. Hey, all, Scott Horton here, inviting you to check out WallStreetWindow.com. It's a financial blog written by former hedge fund manager Mike Swanson, who's investing in commodities, mining stocks, and European markets. Wall Street Window is unique in that Mike shows people what he's really investing in and updates you when he buys or sells in his main account. Mike thinks his positions are going to go up because of all the money the Federal Reserve is printing to finance the deficit. See what happens at WallStreetWindow.com. And Mike's got a great new book coming out, so also keep your eye on WriterMichaelSwanson.com for more details. Hey everybody, Scott Horton here. You ought to consider advertising on the show. Here's how it'll work. You give me money, and then I'll tell everybody how great your stuff is.
They'll buy it, and we'll all be rich as Republicans. Sound pretty good? Shoot me an email, scott@scotthorton.org, and we'll work it out. Hey y'all, Scott Horton here for the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org. CNI stands against America's negative role in the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the war party's relentless push to bomb Iran, and the roles played by twisted Christian Zionism and neocon-engineered Islamophobia in justifying it all. The Council for the National Interest works tirelessly to expose and oppose our government's most destructive policies, but they can't do it without you. Support CNI's push to straighten out America's crooked course. Check out the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org and click Donate under About Us at the top of the page. That's councilforthenationalinterest.org.